Learn, connect, and lead this community at 3l.org. Benji, thanks for doing this.
Pleasure.
Benji's one of my best friends, and he's travelled all the way to Sedona to hang out with me and to interview me on Live and Let Live.
Actually, it's a real pleasure. So I wanted to start by asking like a basic fundamental question about what Live and Let Live is. So if I'm just landing on this planet and I'm asking you to communicate to me about what Live and Let Live stands for and what it is, what would you say?
Live and Let Live is aiming for peace on earth between human beings. And there are two ingredients that are necessary for peace on earth. One of them is freedom, because if I'm forcing you against your will with violence, there's no peace. But peace requires more than just freedom. It also requires the voluntary kindness that I treat you as I wish to be treated, the golden rule. So it's kind of splitting the golden rule into its two fundamental components. That which you absolutely must do, which is you must not aggress against other people, and that which you should do, because then you get to enjoy the benefits of doing so, which is treat each other excellently.
So don't aggress and treat each other excellently.
Yeah.
They're the core principles. And so it sounds like it's a peace movement, which is really simple to understand conceptually, but equally it takes my mind to JFK and John Lennon and others who have stood for peace, and those movements or those ideas have often been seen by authorities and people in control as revolutionary, and there have been consequences for movements like that have been really severe, which makes me wonder what, and it also makes me think about how there are not political organizations today that say they stand for peace. So I suppose my question is it a revolutionary idea that you're trying to move forward? And is there a goal for it to be have political aspiration?
Mm-hmm. I'd say it is a paradigm shift. It's not necessarily revolutionary. It's a paradigm shift in the sense that we're not living in peace today, and no part of any country is really allows people to live free. So in that sense, there's a big change, but it's not a revolution, and we're certainly not advocating for anyone breaking the law, or certainly not advocating for anyone to be violent. It's just really a recalibration of how we see each other. Are we tools? Are you a tool for me to get my way and to achieve the things I want to achieve in life? Or are you a sovereign human being? One that might have different ideas, different ways of living to me that I might even disagree with. I might think they're incredibly unwise, foolish, unkind, immoral, but as long as you're not aggressing against someone else, as long as you're not imposing your will by force, then I really have to express tolerance, because otherwise, when I'm doing something inevitably that you find unwise, I should expect that you use the same tool of aggression against me, and it's not going to work. It's going to be two wrongs trying to make a right. It leads to a spiral of trying to impose the law essentially on each other. And then you get to a situation like today where the law gets very complicated, and no one person on earth really understands the law wherever they are. Not even the best lawyer understands it, because it's been so corrupted away from this core legal principle not to aggress against each other, and overlaid with so much additional morality that it doesn't serve us anymore. It doesn't serve us human beings. And so in answer to the question of whether it's revolutionary, we're not against anyone. We're not against any government. We're not against any corporation, any group, any individual, so long as they don't aggress. And that's quite consistent and universally fair, we think. There's no exception to that rule. And I can't really think of anyone on earth who wouldn't benefit or enjoy living in a free and peaceful world. So yeah, I can see it would be confrontational to the powers that be that are currently in this cycle of aggressing, but it doesn't have to be revolutionary or confrontational. Like your perspective.
And so I suppose things that come to mind are, if I'm just thinking about that framework and what Living That Live stands for, its core fundamental belief system does seem at odds with how modern society was structured today, in the sense that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if we have a world where everyone is free and nobody is aggressing on anybody else, then I suppose we wouldn't have taxation, and we wouldn't have businesses that were polluting the environment and the air where people live and breathe, and we probably wouldn't have governments that were able to force indigenous people off their land, for instance. So a lot of when I think about the world today, you said we're not fundamentally against any one organization, but if I think about the world today, I think about what Living That Live stands for. There is a kind of conflict. Is that fair?
I think it's fair that most people on Earth haven't yet understood that a simple agreement between all human beings is available, requiring no invention, no philosophy to sharpen it up. It's available to us now, and most people can't really imagine what that world would look like. So it feels safer to stay in the cage, because at least in the cage it may not be fun, it's a bit cramped, I don't get to do what I want, but I know what to expect.
Okay.
And so our job really is a cultural shift, in terms of the question of whether Living That Live is political or cultural. My sense is that politics stems from culture. So primarily, this is a cultural movement that is really reminding people that there's no requirement to give your authority away. That's the system that we live in, and it's just an invented system. It's not like a natural. In fact, that word "natural" is interesting, because even Live and Let Live is not necessarily natural. It's just an idea in opposition to the idea of slavery. Ultimately, it's a utilitarian choice. Like, which one do we think leads to a world we most want to live in? Slavery has its benefits. We get to tell people what to do, but ultimately it leads to resentment, and that leads to fear, which leads back to coercion, because if I'm fearing what you're going to do to me, I should coerce you first so as to not be the recipient of your coercion. More resentment, more fear. It's not a very nice loop. Even talking about it's ugly. The alternative: start from freedom, start from respect for Benji, who Benji is, and how can I treat Benji kindly, well, such that he wants to do the same to me. That's freedom followed by peace, and that freedom followed by peace naturally leads to love, or you could say goodwill. If you're treating me kindly over a sustained period of time, I'm going to feel huge goodwill towards you. And then from that goodwill, I'm not going to want to coerce you. I'm going to want to empower you to be even more like the great Benji that you could be, even more great than you are. And that's the recursive loop that's available.
Are there any examples of this work? Because I think I can see, and we can all see, that the way that you're characterizing the world that we live in is true. There's like deep truth to that. It's not to say that that is how everybody in the world operates and how they behave, but there's definitely those frameworks where you've got that wave of coercion and fear and aggression. But are there examples of groups of people that we could point to think, okay, this can work?
There's not many examples of it in a pure sense. The founding fathers said all men are equal, but what they meant by that was not all races, just men. So they had an essence of the right idea, but they fell quite a long way short of perfection. But ultimately, the idea that each of us has inalienable rights that we can't transfer, of self-ownership. You know, I can't sell that self-ownership to someone else. It's innate to who I am. The fact that we each have that, the founding fathers were right to identify it. Wrong in application, should have been equally applied. And then that did lead to 250 years of greater prosperity than other countries. Certainly not perfect, and the US is a long way from being a free country now, and there are very few examples of a free country, but there are free cities, cities within countries that have been granted greater freedoms. Thinking of there's a place called Prospera in Honduras, and
Christiania, Denmark is one.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a few of these places that give us a sense that more freedom leads to easier life, and then there are the examples of East versus West Germany, North versus South Korea. Generally, people want to flee the more oppressive and move to the more free.
Right, that's helpful. And I wonder if we could kind of go back to the genesis story of Live and Let Live. I think conceptually, for me, you've done a great job of helping me understand what it is and what it aspires to foster in the world, and also what it stands in opposition to. But I'm still left wondering, how people who are coming at it new should think about it. And I'm wondering maybe whether the Genesis story would help in that direction.
Mm-hmm. This is a very, very old idea. When the first cavemen decided to stop beating each other up with a club and share the meat in some reasonable way, that was the first Live and Let Live moment. And it shows up since ancient Egypt time. The Romans, to some extent, had some degree of Live and Let Live, like the idea that the common law and all being equal under the law. The Magna Carta in the UK empowering the normal people and taking the concentration of power away from the king. We can see that the arc of history is one of increasing freedom, and that freedom tends to lead to more invention and innovation, technology, which then helps the standard of living, more prosperity, which also then leads to more freedom. I'm thinking of things like the printing press that enabled dissemination of the Bible. The Bible didn't contain all these rules that you needed to pay the church money to go to heaven, and that was therefore took power away from the church. The internet has done that. So there's this golden rule that features in all the major religious and philosophical traditions. That's really what Live and Let Live is. But specifically, this organization, this charity based in America called Live and Let Live, was born under a Arizona sky. Marc Victor and Rick Fisher sitting out in their desert garden discussing why has freedom movements failed so unequivocally around the world? Why is freedom a dirty word? Freedom is simply just letting people live their lives as they want. Why has that become a political topic? They realized that the framing was all wrong. If you don't have, it's like the motto for Live and Let Live is aim high, fall short, do well. If we're just aiming for freedom and we're falling short, we're not even getting to freedom. If we aim for peace, world peace, of course that's, frankly, that is in some ways an absolute. It's like a Hegelian idea that we can't ever fully reach. But aiming for it and falling a little bit short might still mean we are free and really kind to each other, occasionally making mistakes, but generally living in a much, much better world. And so that's why, instead of just this adherence to not aggressing, which is like quite frankly a negative thing to talk about, like I don't want to talk about assault, theft, coercion, threats, substantial risk, and breaching fiduciary duty. They're all ugly topics. So adding this thing of morality, essentially, we should treat each other excellently, frames it in a much more brotherly, sisterly love, one human family framing that makes me feel much more excited about it. And I didn't really, I think the reason that most people haven't heard of the value of freedom is because it's kind of packaged in this anti and resisting mentality, and that which you resist persists. So instead of that, just like elevating oneself to a higher vibration. We're in Sedona, we've got to talk about the higher vibrations. Is a much more effective way, I think, of selling this thing.
Wow. And how would you describe how you think it becomes manifest in a more concrete way in terms of groups of people living like this? Because you and I can decide that we want to live by the principles of freedom and of living that live, and we can do that in the ways that we interact with each other and in ways that we interact with our other friends and our families. We can try and do that in the ways that we interact with the rest of the world. And yet, if now I'm a citizen of the UK, you're a citizen of the US, and we're living and going through the world in systems which inherently contravene the principles of living that live. So the question is not so much, how do we reconcile that in ourselves? The question is more like practically, how do we get to a place where we can actually break out of all the system of coercion, or carve out a place in which people who want to live like this can exist without not being persecuted or kicked off the land.
The writer Nicholas Nassim Taleb, he wrote about the power of a minority, the power of an intolerant minority. And in some ways, Live and Let Live is intolerant of aggressing. And though we're a minority, we can have impact, even if there's 10% of people on Earth. So 800 million people. Let's just round it up to 1 billion people. I think we probably only need 1 billion people, which is obviously a lot, to agree to not aggress against each other, and then choose voluntarily to associate only with those that follow that agreement. And suddenly it's going to be the party that everyone wants to be in. And if you're in that 7 billion of people who don't get to play in the peace party, of course you're going to want to join it. So I think if we got to 1 billion, we would very quickly get to 7.5, 8. So how do we get to 1 billion is really the question. I think I would say that generally when I speak to people about Live and Let Live, a third of people are just ambivalent. They say, that's great, but EastEnders or like Big Brother, Love Island is on, and I'm excited to watch the next episode, so can we talk about something more interesting? And to them, it's like, good for you. Yeah, we're not, that's not the audience. There's a third of people that don't like it, don't like the idea at all. I would say that those are the third that might find change somewhat scary. I would say that the status quo is more scary than the change we're suggesting by a long way. But I understand that. I understand that resistance. And frankly, I was one of them. I was one of them that was really looking to the coercive powers to solve the world's problems. So I don't hold a grudge against them. I really empathize with them, but I also try not to waste too much time on them. A third of people just seem to get it. A third of people are just like, yeah, I prefer that. I prefer peace. What can I do about it? And so the odds therefore are pretty in our favor. We need 1 billion and we might appeal to a third of the people. So we might get 3 billion. So it's just it's a marketing thing. And if the marketing thing has got to be done by each of us. So this is why our strategy is very decentralized. There's no one who will know Benji's audience better than Benji. You came from Newcastle. How Live and Let Live might resonate with a Newcastle audience is going to be different to the Norfolk farmer community that I came from. I could talk to those Norfolk farmers about the irrational, unprincipled nature of the regulations and the taxes and the things that make their lives very stressful, and offer them an alternative, which is that all regulations are rooted in this principle that we don't aggress against each other, and so even if our audience is just our mum and dad or our sister or our kids, that's enough, because that's an exponential growth. Because if your mum and dad just tells one or two of their friends, it quickly grows huge. And we have an awareness, belonging, change strategy. So what I'm describing now is the awareness wildfire. Understanding that these two principles is all we need for peace. Belonging is when those people who understand it start to help each other, start to live, work, play with each other, so that they are interdependent and finding like win-win outcomes. And again, this is where that minority power can be pretty huge, because if we're helping each other out and employing people from this pool of people that don't want to aggress against each other, quickly we elevate ourselves, we lift each other up. And that then gives us the power to change. And the change can be political. We're not political ourselves, but of course, if people wanted to affect change in their local or regional, national area, these principles applied to different topics require more education. And so we serve in that regard. So we have a book, a knowledge base, a website that teaches people how this applies to many, many complex topics.
And would you be happy to sponsor political organizations or people who are running the government if you felt that they were sufficiently aligned with the principles of Live and Let Live?
No, only in the sense that as a charity with some stipulations, we can't be favoring one politician over another. But what we would do is say anyone can become an ambassador for Live and Let Live. And if you did have aspirations to be a change maker, then first become an ambassador, and we support you with all that knowledge. And ambassadors can support each other. So an ambassador is not it's not a paid relationship. It's a kind of honorary recognition that someone understands this philosophy. So there's no control that the charity has over ambassadors, but the community can then help those ambassadors if it's in a community building capacity or a political change capacity.
Sorry. So presumably the degree to which you bestow upon someone the title of an ambassador would relate to the extent to which they live by the standards of living that live. So if somebody became an ambassador, then they ran for political office, and then they started enacting or supporting laws that add on to its living that lives, would it affect certain living that live? It's had some of that. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, exactly. For example, one of our ambassadors is running for city council in Tempe. So his job is political.
I don't know where that is.
It's right next to here. So we're in North Arizona. Tempe is in Phoenix.
Right.
It's a city in the Phoenix area.
Yes.
But really, an ambassador doesn't have to be doing anything. An ambassador, as you say, just simply has to be living the example, which we all fall short of. Like as in my role as executive director of the charity, I'm falling short of being an excellent human, left, right, and center, as you know. But
it's not true.
But ultimately, it's those that carry the understanding and can convey it clearly, so that the signal is clear as we're spreading the wildfire.
And so let me try and gather a few of the things that you said to kind of crystallize my understanding of what Living at Live is. So it's a charity. It's a decentralized global peace movement. It's not a political organization. And it's a movement for peace, which is based on two core principles. First of which is to not aggress against any other person. And the second of which is to be an excellent person. Am I missing anything?
It's a very good summary. I don't think you're missing anything, other than we haven't talked much about the transition, and you did mention tax, and I didn't answer it. So tax is theft. It took me a long time to reach that conclusion, until someone walked me through it. Like, if you don't pay tax and you don't want to pay tax, play it out, and eventually, like, if you just continue denying the tax man, you get locked up. So there's a sort of it's a coercive act, and therefore it breaches the legal principle. And so tax is something that we shouldn't really be doing to each other if we were respecting each other's sovereignty. That being said, clearly we have a system today that is very dependent on it, and there's also huge inequality that any sane human being would recognize and think that's imperfect. And we in Live and Let Live also think that this huge inequality is imperfect. The question is what to do about it. Do two wrongs somehow make a right? We don't believe so, which is why, being an excellent human being, if you have way more resources than other people, one way of being an excellent human being is sharing a little of it. Not because you're compelled to at the point of a gun, but because it's hugely beneficial to you as the giver, not just as for the receivers. And that being said, in a transition, we would continue taxation. Like, if Live and Let Live, if we reach that 1 billion people, and we reach a critical mass and a majority in some place, and we won, some ambassador won political power, the right thing to do would not be to abolish taxation on day one, because there are dependent people that would die, and we don't want that. It's a bit like a heroin addict. We can all agree that being a heroin addict is suboptimal, but removing the heroin, going cold turkey on day one, could be deadly for that heroin addict. So a planned transition, knowing that you're aiming for zero heroin, is clearly the wise and the right way of doing things. So that transition is really where the ugly reality of trying to make the gear meet the clutch. Like, we have this vision of a free and peaceful world. We're not in one today. Getting there is going to require compromise. It's going to require forgiveness, and and mercy. So justice that leads to the right outcomes, not justice without context. And if we treat others as an enemy that need punishment for all the sins of the past, we're not offering an off-ramp to anyone to kind of move into this peaceful world. This is why Live and Let Live doesn't have any enemies. We can all benefit from this mindset of Live and Let Live.
So anybody who aspires to live in a world where there's more peace and where there's more freedom, where there's more freedom of opportunity and equality of opportunity, can get on board, but they have to recognize that in order for this change to be effected, there needs to be that critical mass of people who are supportive of it, and it's unlikely, if not impossible, to get there without accepting some of the aggressions of the past. Like we can't change that. So I guess that's maybe a big question, which is not necessarily for this conversation, but it sounds like you're saying there would need to be some recompense for the injustices that have been done without there being anything sufficiently significant to disincentivize all of the people or huge numbers of the people who are privileged, perhaps as a result of aggressions that have been done in the past, from signing up to this.
Right. Like we've talked in the past about the UK, where there was a Norman conquest 1,000 years ago, 1066. And a lot of the landowners in the UK are 1,000 years later still the beneficiaries, the inheritors of the land parcels that were divided up by William the Conqueror. And so, as you say, there are people who have benefited from the aggressing of history. And what do we do about that? I think there's a few key bullet points. Number one, we can't solve all the wrongs of history. And all of us have aggressors and victims in our ancestry. We'll all find them there. And so if we go down this track of trying to punish the great grandson of the ancestor's crime, it's going to be a mess. But we do have this period, this transition between here and there, and we can use that. I think there's no one size fits all. In the UK, the transition plan ultimately needs to reduce taxes, but it should probably reduce taxes on the poorest people first, to try and balance that out. Coyotes hiding around us.
Wow.
And the most important thing that Live and Let Live offers to the world is it's the least necessary conditions for peace on earth. So because this is going to be difficult for people, like I'll give you an example. Drugs or prostitution or any one of these victimless crime topics. If you were a devout Catholic or a pious religious person, the idea that there are people selling their bodies for money in the same city as you might feel detestable and something you really want to avoid. But equally, there are going to be other people that have a desire to basically ramp up the tool of taxation to force, try and force equality, and kind of perpetuate that spiral of kind of cat and mouse, like taking from each other rather than producing and creating. So all of us are going to have difficult things to concede in this Live and Let Live thing. The tool of aggressing is used often for good reason, which is that we all want the world to be according to our vision of how it is, rather than tolerate others according to theirs. So it would be pretty difficult to legalize drugs. There are going to be people that go out there and like, oh, if heroin's legal, I should try it. Like there's going to be unwise behavior that stems from that. And legalizing something is never an endorsement. But
I suppose one thing that I've always reflected on when you've described how these changes would happen is that it's a movement in the direction of requiring individuals and groups of individuals to take more responsibility. That's what freedom confers, is the opportunity to take more responsibility. So part of that is that people will make mistakes and people will do things that they end up thinking I shouldn't have done. But by giving them that opportunity, you're giving them also responsibility, and that's a movement in the right direction.
Exactly. There's kind of three categories of human interactions. There's the aggressing, which is what we're calling the illegal part, and then there's pro or antisocial behavior. And freedom allows you to be antisocial or pro-social. And the reason the Live and Let Live is saying let's aspire to be excellent human beings is because that's the positive flywheel that improves the world and leads to reciprocal kindness. But ultimately, freedom does give us the choice to make mistakes and make unwise decisions and learn from them. And if we're denied the ability to make unwise decisions, we're never really learning. Like how much temperance can I really exercise and develop within myself if Mars bars are illegal? I need Mars bars to be legal to develop that muscle of self-control.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to just touch on, which we haven't, for anybody who's listening and thinking, this sounds great, but isn't it just like kumbaya? Like, how does this relate to the world that we actually live in, where people go and get shit done and make a living? I think it's really important to understand that this is not a movement for kumbaya, and it's not a revolution in the sense that people can't go about their lives in very similar way to the way they do today if they so choose. There are just some core principles that are changing. It's not that there won't still be repercussions if you decide to do things that today would be illegal, right? There's still a framework for dealing with that, and there's businesses can still form in the way that they do today, and they have much more freedom to form in ways that they wouldn't be allowed to today, and get going much quicker without all the regulation. And of course, they don't pay tax, so they could make more profits and do more with that. I think it's important to kind of touch on that. So is there anything there that you want to say?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Benji. The world basically is very free today. And a lot of the things that we enjoy, particularly in the Western world, are not going to drastically change. Ultimately, pollution is a form of tort law violation. So it's an unreasonable conduct causing harm. This word aggressing has 8 different forms. One of them is unreasonable conduct causing harm. Within that, pollution sits. So when I say there'll be more free markets, what I'm not saying is there's going to be more destruction of the environment, because part of being an excellent human is stewardship. So it's treating the land with reverence and care, but it's at least not polluting it, at least not polluting other people's land. But the world would be pretty similar, and there's not a huge change to fear. And it's neither capitalism nor socialism. We used to say whether you prefer capitalism or socialism is fine as long as it's voluntary. Like I live in a family, I have a wife and a child. We're socialist within that nuclear family, and socialist beyond it. Like we don't really count the pennies with how we're going out for dinner and stuff like that. There's a good degree of socialism in that friendship. But we can go to a restaurant where we don't know the third party, we don't know the owner, and we can pay them money in exchange for a pre-agreed meal. So, and then again, the other side of self-ownership is where, again, this is not kumbaya. The other side of self-ownership is that I get to protect myself. So that when someone is trying to coerce, threat, or initiate force against me, I can use the least necessary or proportional means to defend myself. So I can't be shooting a trespasser, for kicking a football in my garden. But if someone is about to kill me, I can prevent them from doing so. So that's where this is. There's a kind of might makes reality aspect to this. So not might makes right. That's the mindset of an autocrat or a dictator. But might makes reality, which is that ultimately the way we stop people aggressing against each other is by having deterrence, and so that the free and peaceful people are strong and able to protect the innocent.
So I suppose just to kind of finish on that point, what would be some deterrents? Like how would that work?
There's really no limit, but there's no limit to the creative solution. There's definitely a limit to how force is used.
Yeah.
Force must never be more than proportional. I generally prefer pacifist solutions, but I think calling oneself a pacifist obviously invites it's a sort of vulnerable position to start from, because if you can never use any force, even in self-defense, maybe that's kind of inviting trouble. But generally, there are many, if we're aspiring for pacifism, but knowing that we don't have to be pacifist at the point of imminent danger, then we're using our brains to come up with reasonable, peaceful solutions. Like, is there a way I can just understand what your disagreement is? And can we resolve this as disagreement in a way that's wise, rather than like, I'm just going to keep winding you up, which I'm free to, I'm not breaking the law by kind of
being antisocial.
And one day that might lead you to punch me in the face, at which kind I could punch you back and it's a mess. I'd much rather try and figure out what the problem was before getting to that point.
So would there be prisons? Like, would there be prisons for, somebody who'd murdered various people? And I'm imagining a world where, it's free, so there'll be different rules, if you want to call them rules, or expectations for how people can live and what behaviors are acceptable in one place that might be different from another, just like you have different rules in different states here in America. But if you've got someone who's kind of moving from place to place because they aren't adhering to the expectations and norms of one place and committing aggressions wherever they go, would it be reasonable that there could be a prison in this under a live and let live world?
Yeah. So again, just a reminder to everyone, not just you, but live and let live is the least necessary conditions for peace on earth. Don't aggress, be an excellent human being. We don't say and prescribe what punishment looks like, nor do we prescribe what the transition looks like.
Yeah.
So I would prefer to live in much more of a restorative justice system, where you're not hemorrhaging your own money punishing other people, but instead you're trying to see the good in them, invite them into a better way, using incentives and all this stuff. But if you've got a pedophile, a rapist, a murderer in your community, who am I to say that you can't lock them up, So I think having, again, punishment also must be proportional. So you can't be locking someone up for not paying a £5 parking ticket or something. But generally there are two categories of offences: criminal and civil. A criminal act is usually a serious initiation of violence or a major fraud or something like that, where there's huge damage to someone's property or body. That in a court requires a high degree of evidence, and because the punishment is much more severe, and it includes things like prison, whereas civil matters are much less serious and they don't require so much evidence for a prosecution to be successful, because the punishment is much lower as well.
So would it be fair to say that many of the institutions that we have in the world today, legal institutions that prosecute against aggression and crime, that incarcerate criminals, that protect groups could all exist. The difference would be that they don't exist under the power structure or umbrella of a centralized government.
Exactly. There's three branches of the law. There's the law makers, the law judges, and the law enforcers. And what we haven't talked about yet is the law making side of it, because in this least necessary framework for peace on earth, there's still a lot of things that are unclear. Like, we have these 8 forms of aggressing, which we're clear on, but each one of them at the fringe has a gray area. So for example, this unreasonable harm point, if I am blasting loud music, or if I'm having a huge bonfire and you've got kids in the garden breathing in my toxic fumes, I'm causing pollution, I'm causing unreasonable harm. But if I'm just having a little bonfire and you can smell the sausages, am I breaching a civil, am I making a civil offense here? So where this de minimis threshold is set on things like noise and pollution is really key, and there's no right answer. It's up to the local community to decide amongst what's reasonable. So you don't get to say that, oh, this local community doesn't care about pollution. We say our de minimis at like earth destruction levels. That's not reasonable. So it's only within the reasonable bounds, but obviously that's a subjective thing. So where reasonable minds disagree, we let the local community decide. Something like abortion, super controversial topic. There are 2 right answers. Yes, you're right that the mother is in charge of her body and gets to decide what's in it or not in it. And yes, you're right that at some point we need to recognize that that's a human being. That baby is a human being, deserving the rights that all other human beings get, this equality under the law. And when you grant that baby those rights is unclear. It's to me, it's clearly not like, it's not just the day of birth. It's sometime before the day of birth, maybe when the baby is viable. But are we going to fight to the death over exactly when that day is? No, we should let local communities decide. There are some people that just never want to have abortion in their local community. They should be free to live somewhere and associate with people that have the same view. So that's how the law making is done. The law judging is courts. And again, we're not prescriptive on that, but ultimately those courts probably need to be funded voluntarily if you're going to get rid of taxation. And you can secede from a community. You can say, look, I don't share your view on what's reasonable with this de minimis threshold. I want to live in a smaller community with just my close neighbors. And you can do that, but then the cost of the legal system is going to go up because there's one court spread, the cost of that court spread over fewer people. So there's all those kind of aspects to the local community side. And then the law enforcing is basically, you're free to live your life as you choose. That includes the right to defend yourself, but you don't have to train in like martial arts to defend yourself. You can hire a professional that really knows when it's appropriate to initiate to respond to the initiation of force, so that you're not at risk of getting that wrong. Because if you're the one initiating the force, then you're the criminal. So outsource it to a professional service like a police force. And unlike today, there wouldn't just be one police force kind of monopoly. There'd be competition, most likely. Police forces trying to compete for leading to the most safe communities. But yeah, that enforcement is probably looks like police and security guards.
I think it's really helpful to be going on in this direction with the discussion, because it helps for anyone who's thinking this is a totally radical idea and it's so vastly different to what we have now that it's not worth my energy to even think about supporting it. It helps them to realize actually it's not vastly different in the sense that the way that they will be able to live in the world is not vastly different, but there is this vastly different fundamental point that you just have much greater freedom, and that engenders a sense of agency and a sense of being able to express yourself in the world in a way that we just don't know, frankly, because we've never had that degree of freedom. And with it comes responsibility to be a good person. But that does not then empower people who want to act badly to be able to do that at will, because as you're describing, there would still be structures in place that would prevent that.
Exactly. And the only thing I'd want to say is that like this edition of the peace stuff is not just a marketing thing. Like it's, again, we fall short of it, but we're really aspiring for it. Like I went to meet up with some Live and Let Live friends, and I was talking about some personal issues, and they were like, I think you could have done that a lot better. And I was like, wow, I hadn't really seen that perspective. Like, tell me more. And then I went away. I had a book to read. And then the guy's like texting me saying, how's it going? Are you doing a better job? I'm like, I'm trying. I think so, a little bit. It's difficult, but it's also like a generosity thing. Like we're always inviting each other to our houses. It's an unspoken rule that it's an open door. You come and stay whenever you want. There's a genuineness to this aspiration for excellence, which is different, I think, to the isolationist culture that we have. We're all kind of in our homes watching TV. I think we can live much more excellent lives, much more interdependent, interconnected, strong relationships. It's basically fostering super high trust relationships, relationships that lead to magical outcomes is really that moral principle stuff, the excellent human stuff.
So it feels to me very much that this is a movement that an ideology that if once tasted is so sweet that people are going to be like, that's how I want to live. So what would you say to anyone who's listening to this thinking, actually this, although it sounds revolutionary almost, it sounds like something that makes a lot of sense to me and that I want to give a try. What would be your message to them?
Yeah, it would be follow us on social media. Like this is ground zero of this journey, and ultimately we do need to reach a critical mass of people. So at minimum, following and retweeting, recirculating the message is really, really helpful. But also more importantly, more substantially, become an ambassador. An ambassador they are the respected members of our community. They are the ones that have demonstrated they understand what it means to live and let live. And they are the ones that are disseminating the message and really leading the movement. The charity exists to serve ambassadors. And then, yeah, so you'll find information on all of that and more on www.3l.org or liveandletlive.org, depending on what you want to type. We own both URLs. So it's number 3 and then the letter L.org.
Well, maybe we can leave it there and head back in before it gets too cold or we get eaten by coyotes.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Benji. Great questions. And I love our friendship. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, it was epic.
That's...
Come on.